Hi again. G.B. Caird, that is George Caird, N.T. Wright's mentor, on the build-up to the Jewish War in the first century of our common era, despite the fact that the Roman Empire, starting with Julius Caesar, had given special privileges to the Jewish people, privileges not enjoyed by other pagans. And yet, there was just this building resentment against Roman administration. Caird has made the point already that the Roman administration deserved a more appreciative response than they got from most Jews, except for the Sadducees, who were very, very friendly because they were in political power. So he says the relations between Rome and the Jews steadily deteriorated until the disastrous rebellion of AD 66 to 70. Josephus, the Jewish apologist, tries hard to lay the blame for this catastrophe on a series of unscrupulous Roman officials, and he makes out a sufficiently strong case. But before any such charge against Rome can be entertained, it must be remembered that Rome's intentions were good, and that Jewish nationalism presented the Roman government with an insoluble problem. The first procurator, Pontius, who was sent in AD 6 to replace the incompetent Archelaus, had no sooner taken up his office than he was faced with the rebellion of Judas of Gamala. The survivors of the revolt became the Zealot party, whose constant unrest must have been a strain on the nerves of the strongest governor. The next three procurators are no more than names to us, which probably means that Josephus could discover nothing against them. Pontius Pilate is famous for the indiscretions which led eventually to his recall, but he kept the peace for more than 10 years. Even in AD 40, when Caligula made his insane demand that his statue be set up in the temple, the Jews found an ally in Petronius, the legate of Syria, whose temporizing averted the crisis at the risk of his own life. And Claudius, that is the next emperor, made ample amends for his predecessor's blunder by the appointment of Herod Agrippa as king. All this while, however, Jewish passions had been mounting, and after the death of Agrippa, that is in 44, the Romans seem to have abandoned all attempts at conciliation. Certainly in these last 22 years before the outbreak of war, none of the procurators except Festus showed any aptitude for his post. When we glance over the history of the Roman procurators, to whom once more the government of Palestine was entrusted, we might readily suppose that all of them, as if by secret arrangement, so conducted themselves as most certainly to arouse the people to revolt. The revolt of Theudas under Cuspius Fatus, the crucifixion of the sons of Judas of Gamala by Tiberius Alexander, the massacre of the Zealots by Ventidius Cumanus only prepared the way for the repressive government of Felix, of whom it was said that he wielded royal authority with the disposition of a slave. In the midst of this period of rising tension, Paul wrote of his fellow Jews, "The wrath has come upon them to the uttermost." And that is a quote from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 16. Once the cumulative provocation of past years had called into existence the Sicarii, a gang of thugs committed to a career of political assassination. Not even Festus could check the march of events, which was leading the nation inexorably to its doom. You might remember the Sicarii, or the knife men who were mentioned in the book of Acts. And all that could be said in favor of Albinus was that he did not reach the depths of maladministration attained by his successor, Gessius Florus. It was a very different Judaism which emerged from the 4 years of war, that is between 66 and 70, when Jerusalem was finally destroyed. Even that measure of political independence which the Jews had formerly enjoyed was now forfeited, and the Sanhedrin was consequently dissolved. The temple lay in ruins, and sacrificial worship had perforce come to an end. For both these reasons, the Sadducees lost their importance and disappeared from the scene. Only the Torah remained, and it became the rallying point for the resurgent people. This gave to the rabbis an even greater authority than they had previously exercised. Around Rabbi Johanan ben Zakkai, there gathered at Jamnia, that is Jabna, a learned community which appears to have acted not merely as a religious center, but also as a supreme court of law. These rabbis constituted themselves guardians of Scripture, and with them began the movement which resulted in the closing of the canon and the final formation of an authoritative text. It has usually been assumed that the Masoretic text is of a very much later date, but the evidence of the manuscripts from the Judean wilderness seems to prove that the text reached something like its final form during the period between the two Jewish wars, that is 66 and 132. For while the manuscripts belonging to the AD 66 deposit are said to show marked independence of the Masoretic text, those which belong to the AD 132 deposit are substantially identical with it. Although the outward form of Jewish life had changed, Jewish nationalism remained unabated. After the first shock of despair had passed, confidence in the glorious future of the Jewish people returned. One of the principal motives behind the intensive study of the Torah was to prepare for the expected restoration of national independence. Details of the architecture and furniture of the temple were scrupulously preserved against the day of restoration. The sacrificial worship, though discontinued, was diligently rehearsed, and for a time even the priesthood was maintained. The two apocalyptic tracts of Baruch and 4th Ezra, which belong to this period, suggest that there was some variety of opinion about the means by which national triumph was to be attained. But the revolt of AD 132 shows that the majority of people did not cease to put their trust in a war of liberation, and we know that one, at least of the leading scholars, Rabbi Agrippa, gave his enthusiastic support to that ill-starred venture. And of course, Caird is here talking about that final war, the war that is popularly known by the name of the false Messiah, who was the instigator, Bar Kochba, which means son of the star. That's probably why Caird is punning here by calling it an ill-starred venture. And from that moment on, Jerusalem was renamed after the Jupiter of all gods, the god of the Romans, the supreme god of war, the supreme god of Rome, Jupiter Capitolinus, which meant that its Jewish identity was now completely crushed and the city was truly trampled thereafter by Gentiles. We'll put a link into a video we did on J.C. Ryle. If only Jehovah's Witnesses and others had listened to J.C. Ryle rather than to C.T. Russell on the Gentile times.